Thank you, Balaji. Before I start, first thing is I must be grateful to our Balaji for not introducing me. Because for me, Tirupur is almost a home park. It is not an outside place where I come and visit as a visitor. For me, it's almost like a hometown. It's not almost, it's like a hometown. Anything I want in Tirupur and everybody is there for me. So, if at all there is a difficulty, the difficulty is whom to contact if I want, because I know everybody equally well. that is the extent of relationship we have had over the past. But then two things, Mr. Balaji. ஒன்னு வந்து நீங்க கமலஹாசன் ரஜினிகாந்த் சொன்னீங்க. ஸோ இப்போ வைத்தீஸ்வரன் சிவப்பா இருக்காரு, கமலஹாசன் சிவப்பா இருக்காரு. ஸோ ஆட்டோமேட்டிக்கா நான் ரஜினிகாந்த் ஆயிடுறேன் இந்த ப்ராசஸ். This is one. And two is when you were talking about the standard operating procedure, you said on the soft தான் நமக்கு வச்ச ஆப்பு. I think there we should be a little careful in the language. அது ஐ டோன்ட் திங்க் அது நமக்கு வச்ச ஆப்புன்னு சொல்ல மாட்டேன். பிசினஸ் கம்யூனிட்டிக்கு வச்சது. In the process, we have only benefited. See, several years back when fringe benefit tax was introduced, the then finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, he was, there were representations made to him and he was told, why are you doing this? It's going to cause a lot of difficulty. This representation went from institute representatives, our institute. And his reply was, what is your problem? It's an opportunity for you. And one more professional opportunity, why are you objecting? So likewise, this demonetization maybe, well, it has caused problems, but we didn't cause it. Whatever has been caused and people may be suffering as a result of it. In fact, if you would go back and recollect when the demonetization was first announced, it was said that there are two primary objectives, largely. One primary objective was, they said, to reduce terror funding. And the other, they said, was to curb the circulation of black money. Well, it is left to each person's best, thoughts to decide whether any of these or these have actually happened. Because if you look at the amount of currency that has come back to the RBI's chest, it appears that all the black money has also come, and that has also been converted and given back as the new notes. And probably it also appears that terror funding to some extent has also come back. What you call the bogus notes have also come back into the system and probably have been converted into new and fresh notes. These are speculations that we have here. We don't have any records of this, but then it appears from the numbers that is how it is. But the fact of the matter remains that irrespective of the kind of difficulties that have been caused during the demonetization period, I think the business community has been facing problems even after demonetization. And as was rightly put, there were virtually standard operating procedures. And there was, to some extent, we can say, a lack of application of mind on the part of the departmental authorities. There was a lack of application of mind probably on the part of the departmental authorities, where additions were made without looking into whether at all an addition is or is not warranted in the facts and circumstances. In fact, most of the additions have resulted in double additions, not just single additions, but double additions in many cases. And I think most of the business community, particularly those who dealt with the so-called specified bank notes or SBNs as it was termed, have been, made to suffer, and huge demands have been raised. In fact, I know people who have returned an income of 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 3 lakh over the last so many years. And in demonetization, the department has determined their income at 5 crore, 3 crore, and numbers which are fanciful. In fact, when they come to me, I tell them, see, the department has made you rich. Your annual income has now become 5 crore. You are earning 50 lakhs or roughly around those figures per month. whereas you are returning an income of not even 50,000 per annum. This is the kind of numbers that people have had to go through. So demonetization by itself, whether it solved many problems or not, is a larger question which we will not enter because that is not the subject matter of discussion. The fact, however, remains that demonetization has caused a lot of difficulty, particularly to the small and medium enterprises. Rightly or wrongly, I think almost everything has been hitting the small and medium enterprises in the recent past. For example, demonetization, the effects of GST and the compliance aspects of GST have also hit the small and medium. And unfortunately, this pandemic has also affected small and medium enterprises very badly. So demonetization as such has been a bane to many. Of course, at a national level, it may have yielded some possible results which are desirable, but from a from a perspective of an individual businessman, there have been additions which he may have to do. And as you are aware, the Prime Minister has now come on record, has come in public and stated that hereafter assessments will be faceless, likewise first appeal will be faceless. In fact, I am just wondering when second appeal will become faceless too. So which means that you can argue from anywhere, but then I think systems have to change, systems have to improve to make it faceless. But be that as it may, there are a lot of issues that need to be looked into and considered in the context of the provisions relating to demonetization under the income tax. In fact, all of you will remember that when demonetization was announced, one of the major discussions was what if I have an unaccounted money? What if I have an unaccounted money and I offer this unaccounted money in my return of income itself? I go and deposit the specified bank notes in a bank. I will get credited for an even amount in the bank, and later on, which I can draw in terms of regular notes or notes which are otherwise valid. And what will be the implications of this? Now, when this was being discussed, I think most of the professionals, as professionals, all of us said, if you are going to offer it in your income tax return, the implication is only that it will get taxed at 30%, which is the marginal rate at that time. Because if there is an unexplained credit or whatever, an unexplained investment, whatever name we may give it, something we will discuss as we proceed, whatever name we may give, these will be only treated as unexplained credits or unexplained investment, and a maximum tax rate of something like 30% could be levied. This was the kind of, the views that were being discussed at various places among professional circles. Interestingly, the government thought it fit to amend the provisions and bring in a new tax rate, which was 60% plus a surcharge at the rate of 25% on 60%, thereby making it an effective rate of 75%, plus, of course, the other surcharges which were. So the effective rate went up to close to 77%. This was one part of it. So that was also done in a bit of a haste. In fact, in many stages of demonetization, there was a little bit of haste. In fact, if you will recall, sometime around the 20th of December or 22nd of December, if my memory serves me right, the finance minister came on record to say that before banks accept, I'm talking 2016, the then finance minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, came on record to say if banks must accept demonetize the currency hereafter, they must first go into or look into why there was a delay in bringing the money by the people of India into the bank account up to the 22nd of December. Well, the simple reply to that question would have been, after all, at the end of the day, you gave me time till the 30th of December. 22nd of December is still ahead of the time. Why should I bother? But then this notification or circular or this whatever was subsequently withdrawn also. In fact, banks were in a quandary, and a lot of not so desirable transactions happened even at the bank level. In fact, I am aware of one circumstance where the banker had colluded with various businessmen and had helped him to convert certain monies into, in fact, that is still languishing, that has been referred. And the matter has been referred to the police, and FIR has been filed and all of that. Now, before we go to 115 BBE, which is the crucial provision, I think we need to understand the provisions, or we need to discuss the provisions of 68 to 69D. The reason why we need to discuss the provisions of 68 to 69D before we proceed further is because 115 BBE is applicable to all the additions that are, or the incomes that fall within the ambit of 68 to 69D. Now, if one were to go, I will start with section 68. If one were to go to the provision of 68, which deals with cash credits, though the body of the section does not refer to cash credits, the heading refers to cash credits. It provides that where any sum is found credited in the books of an assessee maintained for any previous year, and the assessee offers no explanation about the nature and source thereof, or the explanation offered by him is not, in the opinion of the assessing officer, satisfactory. So, there are two aspects. Aspect number one, the sum should be found credited in the books of the assessee, which are maintained for a previous year. So, a 68 addition can be only in respect of a sum which is found credited in the books of account. And two, it is also required that the assessee must offer no explanation, or that the explanation offered by him is not satisfactory. So either no explanation or explanation not being satisfactory is the second requirement. Only if these two conditions are satisfied, the provisions of section 68 can be operated. And then it goes on to say, the sum so credited may be charged to income tax as the income of the assessee of that previous year. When you say that previous year, apparently it means the previous year. It means the previous year in which the sum is found credited in the books that are maintained by the assessee. So basically, you will see that section 68 it mandatorily requires that the assessee should have maintained the books, and B, that this sum should have been found credited in the books of the assessee. It doesn't use the word books of account, it uses the word books. Incidentally, if one were to go to the provisions of 212A, 212A says books or books of account includes. So it is an inclusive definition. It says books of account includes ledgers, day books, cash books, account books. So the word account books is used, which means it has a fairly wide connotation. And other books, whether kept in written form or as printout, or as data stored in a floppy disk, tape, or any other form. In fact, floppy disk, tape have all become outdated. So today, everything is stored only in what you call a pen drive. But then it covers or any other form of electromagnetic data storage device. So everything will get okay. Now, so if there is something which is found credited in the books of account, and the assessee offers no explanation, or the explanation is not to the satisfaction of the assessing officer, then and then alone can an addition be made under section 68. Only then an addition is warranted under section 68. This should be how one should understand. I don't see any difficulty so far as this aspect is concerned. But while that is said, you will also realize that assessing officers have added under 68 the demonetized monies that have been deposited into the bank account also, which we will discuss as we proceed. So the proviso to section 68 also talks of a case where there is a capital introduction into the firm. And it may be in the form of share application, share capital, share premium, or any one of these forms. And the provisions, or rather the proviso to section 68 says this can also be treated as income of the assessee. This can also be treated as income of the assessee, but it makes it very clear that this will apply only in case where the shareholder who is bringing in the money is a resident and where the company is a company in which the public are not substantially interested. Now, interestingly, if you see the provisions of section 68, the use of the word is may and not the word shall. So, if there is a sum found credited in the books of the assessee, and if the assessee is not able to offer an explanation, or the explanation in the opinion of the assessing officer is not satisfactory, there is still no mandate in law. There is still no mandate in the law that the amount should be added as the income of the assessee. It is still possible that an assessing officer may come to the conclusion that an addition is not warranted in the facts and circumstances. He may still come to the conclusion that an addition is not warranted in the facts and circumstances of it. Now, how can we come to that conclusion is a question that I will answer as we proceed. But then, before I go even further, as I said earlier, the language used whether in 68 or in 69 or in 69A, B or C is may and not shall. In fact, in the context of the provisions of 69, 69A, 69B, there are a number of decisions which say that the use of the word may in these sections, the use of the word may in these sections means that an addition is not mandated. In fact, the lead decision you can say is the decision of the Supreme Court reported in 237 ITR 570. Now, before I proceed further, what I can do, friends, is to circulate the material that I have immediately after the session is over. Maybe I could have done it a little earlier, but then I probably missed it through it. I will have that circulated so you don't have to make note of these decisions that I am talking. All of these are there in the material that I will be circulating in a little while. And I request the organizers to have this circulated among the participants. So, we have a scenario where the decision of Supreme Court is there in P.K. Noor Jahan, reported in 237 ITR 570, where the Supreme Court held that the use of the word may is a clear indicator that the addition is not mandatory, but it can be done, and if it is not being done, it is not being done in facts and circumstances. And in fact, in that case, they deleted the addition. Say, take a simple example. A person, for example, let's say, is say 25 years old. Let's take an example where a person is 25 years old, and in the first 25 years until of this year, until the current year, the person has been abroad only. He has never been in India. He or she has never been in India at all. In the current year, the person comes to India and deposits some money into a bank account or credits some money into their books of account. Can the provisions of 68 or 69 be not invoked? It can be, because one can come to a reasonable conclusion that this should be monies which were earned outside India, because the person never touched Indian soil for so many years. I'm giving an extreme example for one to understand the implications thereof. Interestingly, if one sees the provisions of section 68, 68 also says that the amount which is credited in the books of account will be treated as the income of the previous year in which it is found so credited. And the language, if you see exactly what is used, it says may be charged to income tax. May be charged to income tax as the income of the assessee for the previous year. So, two things you will see. if there is a credit in my, say, for example, my wife's account, can the assessing officer under section 68 deem it as my income? The answer may be no. Incidentally, you will also see that nowhere in section 68 it is creating a deeming fiction. It says it may be charged. It does not use the word it shall be deemed as income. Now, if one were to go to the provisions of 69, 69A, 69B, etc., it talks of maybe deemed to be the income. Why the distinction is there maybe is something also which we will take. Incidentally, I think somebody is raising their hands to speak. If somebody is raising their hands to speak, can I request them to please? Okay, they have muted. Probably it was a mistake. Okay. Anyway, so coming back, one will understand that the language used is may be charged and shall nowhere says will be deemed to be. Now, before I proceed further on the provisions of 68, 69, etc., if one goes to the provisions of Section 5 of the Income Tax Act, Section 5 of the Income Tax Act provides that Section 5 of the Income Tax Act provides that a particular amount will be treated as income provided it is linked to a source, because it says income from any source. Income from any source. So if there is no source, by virtue of the sections of provision 5, it cannot be deemed as income or it cannot be treated as income. And that is exactly why you have provisions starting from section 68 to 69D, where the income need not be associated to a source at all. The income need not be associated to a source at all. Even without being associated to a source, it can be treated as income. Otherwise, just imagine the whole provisions of section 68 to 69D will fail. It is not enough if the sum is found credited, the officer will then have to find out what is the source to make the addition. So, section 68 to 69D dealing the source principle from the principle of taxability. So, the question now arises, why have they used the word may? They have used the word may probably simply because the lawmaker in his wisdom found that while the burden always lies on the assessee, to demonstrate that a credit is genuine, it does not mean that if the assessing officer finds it to be genuine by his own methods of investigation, if he finds it to be genuine, merely because the burden has not been discharged, he can add it as income or he can treat it as income. Now, having spoken about the term burden, one will also have to be very, very careful about what are the tests that are to be discharged for the purpose of discharging the burden which is otherwise cast on the assessee. Because if you see section 68, the burden is heavily cast on the assessee. The burden is heavily cast on the assessee to show what is the nature and source of the credit, where he must give an explanation, and that explanation must be found satisfactory. What are the tests? I think every one of us would know that it is mandatory for the assessee to demonstrate the identity or to prove the identity, the genuineness and the creditworthiness of the creditor. The identity of the creditor, the genuineness of the transaction and the creditworthiness of the creditor. In fact, rightly or wrongly, I'll give an illustration where the department has said, I don't agree with the genuineness. Though I may not agree with this example myself, I am taking a live example just for simplicity. There was a company which has got a loan from somebody and has put it in a fixed deposit. The department says, since you have taken a loan and put it in a fixed deposit, the transaction cannot be done. See, the point is, I did not have an immediate utility, so I put it in a fixed deposit. That's all. But then that is the view that the department has taken in that case. So the identity is demonstrated, the creditworthiness is demonstrated, the department agrees with these. But says genuineness is not true. Genuineness is not. So these three tests need to be satisfied, or these three aspects need to be demonstrated to an assessing officer for us to show that, or for us to discharge the burden of proof. Having spoken about burden again, please remember that burden is something which is static. The burden is always on the assessor. In the context of section 68 to 690, the burden is always on the assessor. What shifts is the onus. What shifts is the onus. Now, onus is not something that is static. Onus is not something that is static. So, if for example, you as an assessee are able to show the identity of the creditor, the genuineness of the transaction, and the creditworthiness of the creditor, the onus shifts onto the department. The onus shifts onto the department to show that any one of these is not fully satisfied. So, though the burden lies on you, the onus is shifting. Take a classic case of the decision of Supreme Court in NRA. The assessee tried to show that the creditors were genuine. The department embarked on a further investigation. And came to the conclusion that the credits are not genuine. So, though the assessee discharged the initial onus, the onus shifted to the assessee, and at some point the assessee could not discharge the onus, and consequently the burden that was heavily cast on him and the addition came to be upheld in the hands of the assessee. Contrary to this, there have been other decisions of Supreme Court where they have said that since these three have been, the burden has been discharged on respect of these three, no addition is warranted in the facts and circumstances. Now, having spoken about section 68 and having spoken about credits which are found recorded in the books of law, one aspect that needs to be borne in mind is, should I prove not the creditworthiness of the creditor, or should I prove the creditworthiness of what I would call a sub-creditor? For example, if I have taken a loan from you, should I prove your creditworthiness, or if you have taken further monies from further people, should I prove their creditworthiness also? I think the law is fairly well settled that I need to demonstrate the creditworthiness of my creditor and not of what I understand or call as sub-creditors. Not what I call as sub-creditors. So, if we look at it from that angle, can we say that an assessing officer is precluded? Can we say that an assessing officer is precluded from doing any investigation in respect of sub-creditor? Please know that the law has evolved and has settled to say that I need to prove the creditworthiness of the creditor and not of the sub-creditor. And the law is also very clear that the burden lies on me and that the onus shifts between me and the assessing officer. Of course, if any of you ask a question, what will happen in faceless assessment? I don't know. That's going to be $1 million question. How they are going to arrange for cross-examination, examination in chief, 131 summons, etc. There are some guidelines that have been laid, but we have to start implementing that in practice for us to understand the real impact of how faceless is going to work. But I'm anticipating that at least in the initial phase, there will be a lot of teething problems and many difficulties can arise in the context of faceless assessment and faceless first. But then, said in the lighter vein, I was reading one newspaper when I was sitting in Kochi one day, some time back, and it said monsoon in Kerala delayed doctors and that. I was wondering what is the correlation between monsoon and doctor. Then I realized that when there is monsoon, there is more fever, cold, flu, etc. And that is the revenue for the doctor. So doctors become unhappy when monsoon is delayed. Likewise, we don't know. For all you know, this faceless assessment or faceless appeal may be a big opportunity that is opening up rather than a big scare. It may be a scare for the SSC, but for the representative, it may be an opportunity also. We don't know how things will pan out to be. How things will pan out to be. These are things that we have to wait and watch. These are things that we may have to wait and watch. Now, coming back, does it mean that the assessing officer is precluded from examining this, what I use as a language, the subcreditor? To my mind, the answer is no. In fact, there is also a direct decision of the Guwahati High Court. The Guwahati High Court reported in 264 ITR 254, 264 ITR 254, where the Guwahati High Court has said that the assessing officer can always examine the subcredit. So, if I am saying I took a loan from you, say for example, I need to prove your creditworthiness. But if you in turn say you received the money from five different people, I don't have to demonstrate those 5% creditworthiness. But as an assessing officer, the assessing officer can examine those 5 people to see if they have a creditworthiness or not. So there you will understand that the primary burden of examining the subcreditor is not on the assessee, but is on the assessing officer. So I have to prove the source as an assessee. I don't have to prove what I call as the source of source. But an assessing officer can always look into the source of source. Likewise, what if money has come from unaccounted monies of the lender? Doesn't matter. It is for him to answer. If we are able to demonstrate that it is unaccounted money of the lender, then it is for him to answer the questions. And that cannot be the basis for an addition in my hands. Of course, one may always have to examine what will happen if it is a cash loan, whether it is better to offer it under 68 or to go into the provisions of 269 SS and things. And we were discussing about how the onus keeps shifting between the assessing officer and the assessor. Why I am dealing with this is probably something which we will discuss once we get into 115 DBE, because that is very crucial for us. These are very crucial for us. Though technically I might be of the view that an addition under 68 cannot be made in respect of specified bank notes. The principles laid down in section 68 are very crucial. So when the 3 aspects have to be proved, the identity, the genuineness of the transaction, and the creditworthiness of the creditor, mere statements may not suffice. These have to be brought out in the form of some evidence. And as you know, the assessing officer can make inquiry. Now, there are difficulties that one may face because you will understand that as an assessee, your scope, your powers, your rights are a little restricted. See, let's say, for example, I have given you a loan in the last year, and in the last year itself, you have repaid the loan to me. I have given you a loan in the last year. You have repaid it to me last year. Now let's assume your assessment is taken for scrutiny, and a question is asked to prove these 3 aspects. It's going to be extremely difficult for you to get any kind of evidence from me. Because at least if the loan is still outstanding, I might oblige. But if the loan is not outstanding, I will take care of my priorities. I am not bothered about you. I may not give you whatever details are required. Now, there are a number of court decisions where the courts have said that if the assessee, for the purpose of discharging the burden on him, requests the assessing officer to issue summons, then summons must be issued by the assessing officer. So, you may request an assessing officer to issue summons, and once you make such a request, it is the duty of the assessing officer to issue summons. Well, a question may arise: what if the assessor or the lender does not appear? The creditor does not appear. The mere fact that there is non-appearance on the part of the creditor itself cannot lead to an adverse inference that the income must be belonging to me. One has to look at all the surrounding circumstances to come to that conclusion. It cannot be one hard and fast rule that can be made, where you can say non-appearance of the creditor automatically should be treated as an income. No, I don't think that can be a correct proposition either, and you have decisions to that effect as well. But then you have to remember that the officer has got the power to issue summons. Incidentally and interestingly, there has been one case, at least in Chennai, a politically sensitive case, where the assessing officer issued summons to the assessee. The assessee did not appear in response to the summons. Any one of us mostly would have thought that what the officer can do at best is to levy a penalty of 10,000 rupees under 272A for failure to respond to the summons. But on the other hand, the assessing officer issued an arrest warrant. This is the first time I have ever come across an assessing officer issue an arrest warrant for non-compliance of the 131 summons. But then if one were to look at 131, Section 131 makes it clear that all powers that are vested in the Civil Procedure Code will vest on the assessing officer in terms of 131 of the Act. So under 131, under the Civil Procedure Code, if an arrest is possible, the assessing officer gets the same power, is the view that the department took. Of course, the warrant was quashed by the Madras High Court, and with a direction that the SC appear immediately and forthwith before the assessor. They didn't go into the merit of whether the arrest is possible or not. They said anyway the SC has now given an undertaking that he will appear. So we are quashing this warrant and allowing the SC to appear before the assessing. So this was one other aspect that you have to bear in mind. So you can not only request for 131 summon to be issued, you can even pray that whatever consequences will befall, like levy of penalty or even issuance of arrest warrant in certain cases, may be exercised by the assessing officer. Of course, it is his discretion whether or not to do so. But as such, you can request summons to be issued, and in which case the creditor should normally be appearing and giving a statement. And as principles of natural justice will require it, you will have a right to cross-examine the witness. But then remember that if you are requesting for summons to be issued, the person may become your witness. And the assessing officer can say, no, you examine the person, I will cross-examine. That is also very much possible on the part of an assessor. In fact, if I were the assessing officer, that is what I will do. Going further, the power of the assessing officer is, as I said, not a necessarily absolute power to make an addition. If he is satisfied or if he believes that it is genuine, there is no need for him to make an addition because of the language used being made. Now, we also saw that the provisions of Section 68 can be invoked only in a case where there is a credit which is found in the books of the SSC in the previous year. A credit in the books of the SSC in the previous year. So maintenance of books is a prerequisite. Maintenance of books is a prerequisite. Now, what is books? We discussed that books is or books of account is defined in section 212A. But then interestingly, you will also see that 212A refers to, if you see, it's a very wide definition. It says books of account means account books. One of the items it says is account books. I really don't know whether we need a definition to say books of account is account book. It is just like, the definition of the term scrap in 260. You go to section 260 and see the definition of the term scrap, it says scrap means waste or scrap. Interestingly, you will see that they have defined the word scrap using the word scrap itself. Because I don't know the definition of a particular word is why I go to a definition. And if you are going to define it with the same word, probably sometimes the objective may be lost, but that's how it is defined. Similarly, you will see books or books of account is defined to include account books. It is defined to include account books. This seems to be one other. Now, be that as it may, coming back to examine what is the appropriate position that one has to look at. You will see that if there are no books of account, section 68 cannot be invoked. Likewise, the entry should be found credited in the books. What is books? Books is defined in 212A. Now, there is a decision of Bombay High Court in a case called Baichand H. Gandhi, where the Bombay High Court says that bank passbook or bank statements are not books of account. Because a bank passbook is something that is maintained by the bank. It is not maintained by me. In fact, if you go back to olden days and see a bank passbook, today some banks have come back to bank passbook. But if you see a bank passbook, basically you will find that a bank passbook, when you close your account, you are supposed to surrender it. Reason being, it is belonging to the bank. It doesn't belong to you. It is in your custody, but it belongs to me. So the Bombay High Court says it is not a books of account maintained by the SSC. Even if you call it a books of account, it is not maintained by it. Next, what about a P&L account and a balance sheet? You have the Madras High Court in Taj Borewells, where the Madras High Court says P&L account and balance sheet are not books of account. They are a summation of the books of account. So you cannot make an addition merely on the basis that something is found in the P&L account or balance sheet. It should be found credited in the books. What about loose sheets of paper? There are a number of decisions now, but the lead decision being CBI versus VC Shukla, which has also been applied in a number of tax cases by various high courts, to say that loose sheets are not books of account. Loose sheets are not books of account. An addition under section 68 cannot be made on that basis. Now, we have to look at the subsequent provisions. If one goes to the provisions which are after section 68, you will see that section 69 deals with what one talks of as unexplained investment. In fact, from here on, things become a little simpler because the principles that are laid down are more or less similar. So, what do you mean by an unexplained investment? An investment which is made in the immediate preceding financial year, which is made in the immediate preceding financial year, which is preceding the assessment year, and which is not recorded in the books of account, if any, maintained. Which is not recorded in the books of account, if any, maintained by the SSC. And the source of income for the investment is not explained or is not explained to the satisfaction of the SSC. So A, there must be an investment in the financial year preceding the assessment year. See, if you look at section 68, the addition is made in respect of the credit which is found. It is made in respect of the credit that is found in the books. So whichever year you credit is the year in which I will keep this income if I want to invoke the provision of section 68. But for section 69, you must add it in the previous year in which the investment is made. The assessment year relevant to the previous year for which or in which the investment is made is the appropriate year. And then if you see section 69, there is a variation from section 68 by using the language, investment is not recorded in the books of account if any maintained for any source of income. So, if you see section 68, it is mandatory that to invoke the provisions of section 68, the provisions relating to maintenance of books is absolutely necessary. So, if somebody does not maintain books of account, the provisions of section 68 are not at all invocable. But that is not true of section 69. In the context of section 69, if one does not maintain books of account, still the addition can be made because the language used in section 69 is if any maintained by the assessee. So if it is not maintained, then also the provision 69A can be invoked. In fact, if you read the language carefully, it says, in respect of a source maintained by him for any source of income. So, this can go source wise also. If you are maintaining books for your business income but not maintaining books for your other sources income, I can still invoke section 69. Even though I may be aware that your income has not come from the business but from other source. But please remember that if I identify what is the source for the addition, thereafter the provisions of section 68 or 69 are not invocable. Why this becomes very crucial is if an assessee can demonstrate the source, please remember that section 68 or 69 is not invocable and income has to be added. For example, if I have done a business, let's assume, which I have not shown to the income tax department. Department comes on a survey or a search operation and finds that I have had certain particular businesses which I have not shown to the department about. Whether the department can add this, the answer will be yes. The income therefore. But whether they can add it under 68 to 69D, the answer may be no, because the income is from a particular business. Only when the source is not demonstrated, 68 to 69D can apply. Otherwise, these provisions cannot apply. Rather, I should say 68 to 69C, because 69D is always on a slightly different footing, and we will not take or spend much of time there, because that's something, where there are a lot of debate on how 69A should be followed. Now, 68, we were talking about 69. So here it talks of books of account, if any, maintained by the assessor. So there is no need that books of account should be maintained for invoking the provisions of section 69, or for that matter, as you proceed further, you will see even in the context of 69A or B or in those contexts. What is required is only in the context of 68 that books must mandatorily be maintained. Now, having spoken about this aspect, maintenance of books not necessary. Another aspect that you will see is that section 69 also uses the word may and not the word shall. It uses the word may and not the word shall. So again, the same principle, particularly the decision of the Supreme Court in PK Noor Jahan, where the Supreme Court held that since the word used is may, it is not mandatory that an addition should be made for the purpose of making an addition under section 69. Even though the assessing officer may come to the conclusion that you have not given an explanation or the explanation is not done. Friends, I'll just break for a moment. I'll just join within 1 minute. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So 69 does not require maintenance of books, but again the language used in section 68, the word may is found here also. But you will also find that 69 uses the word the value of investment may be deemed to be the income of the assessee of such financial year. That means the financial year in which the investment was made. And what does it say? It says the value of investment may be deemed. So the word may. And it says deemed to be income. Unlike section 68, which says shall be charged, may be charged to income tax. Here it says it may be deemed as income. Why have they used a different language? In section 68 vis-a-vis section 69, 69A, B, C, you will see that the reason is that in section 68 there is a credit. Obviously, if there is a credit and if you cannot explain it, that will be income. So I can charge it to tax. But if there is an investment that you cannot explain, that by itself does not become income. What becomes income is the source, but you don't know the source. What becomes income is the source, but you as an officer don't know the source. That is probably why they have used the word. The investment value itself will be deemed. So they are creating a deeming fiction. They are creating a deeming fiction. Now again, this can become very crucial as we proceed, maybe as time permits and all of it, we will discuss what is the effect of a deeming fiction also. To very quickly put it, a deeming fiction deems a particular thing which is not real to be real. But then there are two rules as far as deeming fictions are concerned. One, a deeming fiction must always be taken to its logical conclusion. And two, the most fundamental rule is that there cannot be a deeming on a deeming. You cannot deem something which is already deemed unless the law makes provide for it, because the deeming itself is a fiction created by law. You cannot create a fiction on a fiction. Right? Now, the provisions of section 69 are applicable only in a case where the assessee is not able to explain the source or if the source is not satisfactorily explained. Now, what if an investment is found in the name of a third party? The assessee cannot be called upon to explain any credit or investment which is found in the name of a third party, because that must be an investment in my name. The minute an officer comes to a conclusion that investment has been made by in the name of A, it is A who should be questioned and not B. Logically, that's how it should follow. Of course, the department has not been necessarily following this rule. But in my personal view, the investment in whosoever name is, that person alone requires to be proceeded against, not any other person. Likewise, The investment made, even if it is in the name of a relative, the SC cannot be asked to prove. What about the effect of surveys, etc.? When there is an addition which is supposed to be survey based, it is always possible that one can retract. Of course, one will remember that the Prime Minister has recently come on record to say that only the investigation wing will conduct surveys, and that has been followed by board instructions also. So hereafter, officers cannot come on a survey. Of course, we have delegated the power to international tax and also to TDS, but otherwise it should be only the investigation. Now, there are various other issues that may arise, like the contents of the books of account, if being maintained, etc. One will see that there is a presumption in 292C, and 292C presumes that the books of account belongs to a person whose possession is found. The contents are true and correct. The handwriting is that of the person who can be reasonably purported to have written it, and it is stamped, executed, and attested on the date, time, and by the person who is said to have stamped, executed, and attested. These are presumptions. These are very much rebuttable. At this stage, one will quickly recall the decision of the Supreme Court and also the Madras High Court in a case called Khader Khan and Sons. Khader Khan and Sons, where they said that any statement recorded under 133A has no evidentiary value. A statement recorded under 131 has evidentiary value. A statement recorded under 132.4 has evidentiary value, but not a statement under 131. Incidentally, there is a board instruction, which I will also circulate. The instruction number also I will circulate, where the board makes it clear that statements that are recorded whether under 133A or either under 133A or under the provisions of 132.4 do not have any evidentiary value. Addition should be made only on the basis of the material that is found in the course of a search or survey operation. Likewise, if we have to look at from the point of view of various aspects like stock difference, we have to see whether there is excess stock, shortage of stock, etc., and accordingly take a decision on how much should be offered. But ultimately, the bottom line is that you must offer or take into account the net income of the assessee for the purpose of an offer. But also remember that if you can demonstrate a source, then 68 to 69C is not invocable. It is not invocable. Addition may still be possible, but 68 to 69C is not invocable. But then you must understand that the rate of tax difference could be between 30% and say 75%. That's a huge difference that can happen. There is one query that has come. Let me just. In section 69, the word is it explained. Does the word mean the value recorded in the books, or the face value, or the market value, or the AO can estimate the value? In my view, it is always the value of investment. In my view, it is always the value of investment, not the market value. If one were to go to the Black Money Act, the BMA, you will see that the officer can add the market value as on the date on which he finds the unexplained investment or asset. He can add the market value, but that is not found in the Income Tax Act. What it talks about is only to add the income, or rather it says the money and the value of the bullion or jewelry in section 69A, or in section 69 the value of investment. The value of investment here refers to not the market value, but the face value. Of course, the face value cannot be determined then the estimating officer may resort to an estimate. For example, if you have constructed a building and not accounted the building at all, there is no way the estimating officer can find out what you have invested, but he can still look into an estimate and then probably make an addition, for which he may take the services of a valuation officer, etc. He may take the services of a valuation officer. Right? Now, coming back, we were talking about section 69. 69A is very similar to the provisions of 69, but it deals with the value of money, bullion, jewelry, or other valuable articles, which may be deemed as the income of the assessee. And it is deemed as the income of the assessee in which the assessee is found to be the owner. Right? Because if you see the language in section 69A, it says, where in any financial year, the assessee is found to be owner of money, bullion, jewelry, or other valuable article or thing of money, and the same is not recorded in the books of account if any maintained by him for any source. The assessee offers no explanation about the nature and source of acquisition. Then, or if it is not in the opinion of the assessing officer satisfactory, then it may be deemed as the income of the assessee of such financial year. So again, the use of the word deemed, may be deemed. So that is one point that you will bear in mind. That is one parent point that you may bear in mind. That is one point that you may bear in mind. But at the same time, you can also see that I think I have some difficulty here. I'm sorry. Yes, some technical problem. I think my net is fluctuating a little. I'm sorry. I think it's better now. I've changed my internet connectivity itself. Anyway, coming back, 698 deals with money, bullion, jewelry, or other valuable article or thing or money. So when you talk of money, bullion, jewelry, valuable article or thing, it may not be possible to identify it to a year. It may not be possible to identify it to a year. Therefore, they are saying in the year in which it is found, or in the year in which the assessee is found to be the owner. So, first conclusion, the department has to come to the conclusion that as the owner, they should find it and then add it. So, normally, the provision of 69A will apply only in a case where there is a search or survey operation, more often than not. More often than not, it will be applicable only when there is a search and survey operation. Right? Again, here it talks of books of account, if any, maintained by the assessee. So, if no books are maintained, then this question does not arise. So, if there is a search, for example, in my premises, and they find unexplained money, bullion, jewelry, or other valuable article, then it will be deemed as income of the current year, that is the year on which it is found, because the law provides in 1669 that it should be of the year in which the assessee is found to be the owner. Whichever year I am found to be the owner, that year will be treated as the year in which the income is to be treated as deemed income. 69B is very simple, which is again very similar to 69A or 69 to be more precise. It is even more closer to 69. It talks of investments not fully disclosed in the books. Now, 69 talks of an investment not at all disclosed, and 69B partly disclosed. Say, for example, a building. Part of the building is disclosed, part of the building is undisclosed. Then 69B will be invoked, not section 69. If it is fully undisclosed, 69. If it is money, bullion, jewelry, valuable article thing, 69A. This is how it proceeds. Incidentally, I have a query from Mr. Venkatraman which says, but in capital gains, we are resorting to the fair value. But I'm sorry that I don't understand this query. See, in capital gains, if there is an investment made, then you are permitted to substitute the fair market value as of a specified date. in which case I will substitute the fair value. But otherwise, so far as sale consideration is concerned, I am only taking the full value of consideration. And so far as cost is concerned, I am normally resorting to the cost. But if the asset was acquired prior to a cut-off date, then I am permitted to substitute fair value. I think that is provided for in the section, and therefore that can be done. I do not know whether sir has a different question, sir. If you have a question that's slightly different from this, maybe I will be glad to, try to answer if I can. Otherwise, I will stand corrected. Now, if you go to section 69C, 69C talks of an unexplained expenditure. Now, someone may ask me, how can expenditure become income? The simple point is that you don't have a source to explain the expenditure. It says where in any financial year, the assessee has incurred any expenditure and offers no explanation or the explanation is not satisfactory, then it shall be deemed of the income of the year in which the expenditure is incurred. That is in the financial year in which the expenditure is incurred. Right? It will be deemed as that year's income. Now, section 69C also has a proviso which says that against this I will not allow any deduction to be claimed. Against this I will not allow any deduction to be claimed. Of course, this has to be read also in light of 115 BBE, which we will do as we proceed. So 69C talks of expenditure. Why they say no deduction will be allowed is because many people who are business assessees were found to have resorted to claiming unexplained expenditure. And when that was found, they said, after all, end of the day, it's a business expenditure, allow it again. So no addition was being made at all effectively. Therefore, they bought in this proviso. Now, having spoken this much about the provisions of 68 to 69C, let's go to the provisions of 115 BBE. Now, 115 BBE is a provision which seeks to bring to tax the incomes of the nature referred to in section 68 to 69D. Of course, 69D, you're all aware, deals with amounts borrowed or repaid on hundi form. Okay. Now, 115 BBE is a very small section, but a draconian section. If you must use that word, it is draconian. It says where the total income of an assessee includes any income referred to in section 68 to 69D and reflected in the return of income furnished under 139, then or determined by the assessing officer includes any income referred to in section 68, 69, 69A, 69B, 69C or D. If such income is not covered under clause A, the income tax payable shall be the aggregate of. So it talks of clause A and clause B. I'll go clause wise. First, it includes income of the nature referred to in 68, 69D and is reflected in the return of income furnished under 139. Or there's a clear or in between, or determined by the assessing officer under section 68 to 69D. So you will see that only two aspects are covered. Only two aspects are covered. One, what is covered is an income which is shown in a return of income furnished under 139. Two, an income determined by the assessing officer and not covered by clause A. So if I have already offered it, then B does not apply. I have a very, very fundamental doubt here. Returns can be filed under the Income Tax Act under 139 in response to 142(1), in response to 148, or in response to 153A. But if you see the language in 115 BBE, BBE is attracted only in two circumstances. A, income reported under 139 in a 139 return. B, income that is determined by an AO and not falling under clause A. That is, you have not shown it in a 139 return. The officer has determined it. Now, can one say that if income is shown in a 148 return or a 143A return or in a 142-1 return, that cannot be falling within the ambit of 115 BBE? Because 115 BBE talks of a return that is furnished under 139 or a return or an income that is determined by the AO and not falling under the clause A, that is returned under 130. So if I have returned it under 142.1, 148 or 153A, can one say that the provisions of 115 BBE are not applicable? To my mind, this may not be a correct proposition. This may not be a correct proposition. Of course, all of you know me very well, and it is not necessary that I will argue only what I believe to be correct. I argue whatever I am supposed to argue, but then I may have my personal views also. My personal view is this is not appropriate because if you have not shown it in return under 139, it means that the officer has determined it. Because the officer in every case determines your income when he makes an order of assessment. When he makes an order of assessment, he determines your income. And what clause B says is he determines it, but it is not covered by A. So I have, as an officer, determined your income. It is not covered by A. Therefore, I can come to the conclusion that it is falling under clause B and consequently 115 BBE will apply. And what is the amount or rate of tax in respect of clause A? It says the amount of income tax calculated at 60%. The same thing would say in respect of clause B also. And then it says that notwithstanding anything contained, no deduction in respect of any expenditure allowance shall be allowed to the assessee under any provision of the Act in computing income referred to in clause A or clause B of subsection. So there is an overlap here, you will see. Now, section 69C specifically provides that I will not allow expenditure. 115 BBE also says I will not allow any expenditure. But 115 BBE goes one step further. It says I will not provide for any expenditure, any allowance, or any set-off of losses. Now, does that mean that for the purpose of provisions of section 68 to 69C, you can claim stands if 115 BBE had not provided for something like this because it was earlier not there, 115 BBE was not there. Prior to the insertion of 115 BBE, can one say that you can probably claim? I would think so. The answer may be yes, though there is one Calcutta High Court, which is, Gujarat High Court, which is against that view. But of course, most of the tribunals and other high courts have been taking a similar view, saying it can be claimed. Of course, this rate of tax may have to be increased by the appropriate surcharges also. Now, that leads us to some very crucial questions. You will remember that 115 BBE is a section that was inserted by the Taxation Laws Amendment Act 2016 on 15th December 2016. And it said with effect from 1st April 2016. Okay. So one has to first of all see whether 115 BBE can be made retrospective in operation. The lawmaker seems to believe that it can be made retrospective now because they have brought it in or inserted it with effect from 1st April 2016 and the Amendment Act was brought in on 15th December 2016. Now, it is my personal view that a new liability cannot be fastened by bringing in a retrospective amendment. a new liability cannot be fastened by bringing in a retrospective amount. Okay? Therefore, in my view, all credits that are found by way of what we call demonetized specified bank notes cannot be made as a tax under 115 BBE at the rate of 60 plus 25%. What will apply is only the old provision. Up to the 14th of December, it should be the old provision, which should be 30%. For this proposition to say that a liability cannot be fastened retrospectively, I will refer to the decision of the Supreme Court in a case called Vatika Township. Now, friends, you will all remember that prior to the insertion of 153A to C, governing the provisions relating to an assessment where there has been a search and seizure operation, you would recollect that the provisions relating to block assessment were in place, and they brought in a new surcharge under 113 of the Act. And the Supreme Court, while interpreting 113, it was first, the Supreme Court said, no, it is retrospective in operation. Then the matter was referred to a larger bench. And the larger bench came to the conclusion that 113 does not have retrospective operation because it creates a new levy. Likewise, here also, from 30%, the levy has been made 60%. Therefore, in my view, it should not be retrospective in operation. In fact, if you read 115 BBE, nowhere does it create any kind of a deeming, but it has been inserted. In fact, if you see 113 and various other provisions, there the Supreme Court has held as saying that it is prospective in operation. And incidentally, you will see that nowhere in the language in 115 BBE, it says it shall be deemed always to have. No. There is no deeming fiction created by 115 BBE also. It says the tax rate will be this. The deeming is under 69 to 69C or deeming. But the deeming is not in terms of the rate of tax under 115 BBE. So consequently, one has to appreciate that in my understanding, the levy at 75% is not retrospective in operation. It is not retrospective in operation. It is only prospective in operation, which means that amounts which are found credited, etc., post the 15th day of December 2016 alone can be brought within the tax rate mentioned in 115 BBE, not other amounts. Not other amounts which are not falling under or not falling within the or beyond the cutoff date of 15th of December. If it falls after the cutoff date, then there can be little doubt in our mind that the tax rate will be higher. Now, subsection 2 I was referring to, which says no deduction, allowance, or set off of loss shall be allowed. So, when they say set off of loss, they are not referring to current loss, brought forward loss, nothing. So, tax rate will be this without any set off. So, does that mean that the tax rate will be 75% or 60 plus 25% thereof? But the set off is deemed to happen? No. So, supposing I have a loss under some other head and I am not able to set it off because of the embargo placed by 115 BBE. Because of the embargo placed by 115 BBE, it has to logically follow that that loss has not been set off or that allowance has not been given to me. And consequently, I don't have to bother about the fact that there has been a set off. So next year, if I have regular income, I can always resort to paying taxes in the next year after set off of losses, if any, that are otherwise permissible, in law. Right? So 115 BBE has the effect of increasing the rate of tax and therefore cannot be said to be retrospective is my first view. Second, what is the impact of demonetization in the income? First of all, I think different officers have also done different things. I don't think there has been a lot of complete uniformity. There have been SOPs, so-called SOPs, but despite all that, there has been a lot of confusion as well. Right? Now, if you look at how they have operated or how they have made the assessment, what they have done is they have added as income. The sums that are found deposited in the bank accounts by way of what you call the specified bank accounts. In fact, for the assessment year 17-18, virtually the department seems to have collected only SBM cases and made an addition in each and every case. By making additions to the income wherever there are specified bank. Any amount of explanation has not found favor with the department. I have not seen any officer agree that, okay, we are specified bank. In fact, officers have made an addition and have written saying, why will somebody exchange what is not a legal tender and give away valuable goods? For example, if I am a retailer of, say, furniture, and I have accepted specified banknotes between the during the demand period, I have accepted specified banknotes. The department's claim is you are giving away your stock of furniture for currency which has otherwise got no value. I don't agree with that theory because I can go and deposit this money in the bank. and claim credit for it in my bank account. So how can you say that this money has no value? The bank is willing to credit my account for that amount if I deposit the money into the bank account. Therefore, I don't agree with that theory, but all the same department has been doing. Now, incidentally, you have a number of decisions rendered in the context of the erstwhile demonetization, when 1,000 rupee notes were demonetized. You have quite a few decisions there. But before we go there are decisions which are not directly in the context of demonetization. Department says you have frequently drawn cash and deposited cash, we don't agree. Well, what is the law that is prohibiting me? In fact, there is one tribunal decision, the Delhi bench, where they say frequent withdrawal is not prohibited and therefore can be accepted as source. Likewise, cash in hand. What the department has done is, whatever is the cash in hand that has been shown as a cut-off date, different officers have taken different views there. Different officers have taken different views there. Some of them have taken the view that whatever is found as on the first day of April of 2016 should be allowed. Whatever is found as on the 7th day of November, which was the date when demonetization, or 8th day of the November, that is the closure of the 7th day, 8th day, beginning should be taken, etc. But then all sorts of problems have arisen. In fact, jewelers were some of those who have been very badly hit. Because everybody, once demonetization was announced, those who had money with them and probably unaccounted also started going to the jewelers and buying gold. And there was nothing to bar them from selling because the announcement came at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. has been a very dicey time on 7th of November. And nobody, was expected not to deal with it up to 12 midnight. Of course, facts may vary from case to case, but be that as it may, the fact that it was not barred itself is one other aspect that has been taken as a difference. That has been taken as a difference. Now, so far as legal tender, etc., is concerned, they have said it is not legal tender. But rightly or wrongly, to my understanding, there is nothing in demonetization to say that it ceases to be legal tender. In fact, if one will see, there was an act called the Specified Bank Notes Cessation of Liability Act 2017. And it said, from the appointed date, that is 31st of December 2016, from the appointed day, no person shall hold such bank notes knowingly or voluntarily. So only from 31st of December 2016, it became illegal tender. You cannot hold it. Up to that date, it was very much legal tender. In fact, if one were to look at this in contradistinction with the earlier demonetization of 1,000 rupee notes, there it immediately became illegal tender. That is not so here. But even in that context, there have been a number of decisions, which we will discuss. But before we go further, one main aspect that we have to remember as an explanation is the theory of preponderance of probability. Now, always a question will arise, under what section should the addition be made? In my view, no addition can be made under 68. The addition should be made, if at all, under 69A. That's my personal view of the matter. Views may differ on this also. So, incidentally, the theory of preponderance of probability, in fact, the department relies on three major cases. One is the decision of Supreme Court in Sumati Dayal, the decision of Supreme Court in Sumati Dayal, the other is the decision of Supreme Court in Durga Prasad More, and the third is the decision of Supreme Court in a case called Mohanakala. Mohanakala comes from Kongu Nadu, the case. It comes from Coimbatore. Right? Now, insofar as Sumati Dayal is concerned, the facts were like this. The SSE had won 16 jackpots in the years 71, 72 and 72, 73. The previous years relevant to assessment year 71, 72 and 73. They had won 16 jackpots she had won. Now, before that, prior to 1969, she herself admitted that she had no experience going to races. And she did not have any professional advice. The only person who gave her the advice was her husband, who also did not have any experience. Right? Now, the matter went to the Settlement Commission. Settlement Commission did not agree with this theory that it was from buying tickets, because those days winning tickets were exempt from that. Matter traveled up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that based on her own experience, her own statement, she does not have experience. And it is impossible for somebody to just enter and win 16 jackpots within a matter of 2 years. And therefore discredited her theory. This was a decision given on the basis of preponderance of probability. Likewise, in the other case, Durga Prasad More, which was even earlier, the SSE claimed the assessment years were 58, 59, and 69, 60. The SSE claimed that he was keeping 2 lakh rupees in cash with her father-in-law. 2 lakh rupees in cash was being kept, which belonged to his wife. The Supreme Court said 2 lakh is a lot of money to keep in cash. It is impossible for us to believe. And these monies came by way of free dan, etc. It is impossible for us to believe that for the last 10 or 12 years, somebody has been retaining 2 lakh in cash. Please remember, the assessment year is 58, 59. Those days, 2 lakh means that you are talking of somebody holding something like 20 crores cash for the last 10 years in the present day circumstance, which they said is impossible. Likewise, Mohanakala was said to be a gift from the driver's son. The Supreme Court probably held that it is impossible for us to believe that a driver's son, though he may be earning enough money today, will give some money to his father's boss and that will be taken or that should be taken as adequate force. I don't want to get too much into Mohanakala because Mohanakala, I have my own doubts on whether that should be taken as a precedent in many cases, because Mohanakala was a case where the third member of the tribunal held against SSB. The Madras High Court felt that the third member had not considered certain evidences. And logically, what the Madras High Court should have done probably is to remit the matter back to the file of the tribunal. But they ruled on the basis of merits that the addition is not wrong. The Supreme Court reversed the Madras High Court, and consequently, the third member decision became final. Logically, that should not have been. The matter should have gone back to tribunal, and tribunal should have appreciated those evidences and then come to a possible conclusion. Right? Now, we were talking about earlier instances of demonetization, and we were talking about the preponderance of probability. Why the preponderance of probability, particularly in the context of these provisions, is because of the fact that you will appreciate that there are some peculiar facts. I am saying I have sold some furniture in cash. So you are agreeing with my closing stock, you are agreeing with my sales, and then you are again wanting to add the SBN. That's technically a double addition. My stock has come down, my sales has been already offered. You cannot again add the SBN because the SBN is nothing but the sale money which I have deposited in the bank. What the department says is, no, we don't know what you did with your sale consideration. These SBNs are your black money which you have deposited in the bank. I think that is very far-fetched. Preponderance of probability will show that this cannot be added in that manner. Incidentally, I think I will just take 2 more minutes of your time and pause here for a moment so that we can have some meaningful discussion. You have one decision of the Patna High Court. Which is reported in 42 CCH 104, where the issue was in the context of old demonetization, where the cash balance shown in the books was sufficient to cover the high value demonetized notes. They said that has to be accepted. So, opening cash balance available has to be accepted according to the Patna High Court. Next, you have the Bombay High Court. Likewise, on similar lines, where they said sufficient cash balance is there, that has to be accepted as source. You also have an interesting Allahabad High Court decision. Where the department came with a theory saying that you have sufficient cash balance, no doubt. But our complaint is that a substantial part of your opening balance, that is bank cash balance, is reflected by SBNs. The High Court said, no, that cannot be. The fact that it is reflected, substantial part is reflected by SBNs cannot be a basis to deny me the benefit of allowing the benefit of opening balance in the SSB. Likewise, basically there are only twofold. One is opening balance, 2 is sales. Once they accept my book and accept the sales, they cannot deny me the benefit is my due. Likewise, so long as there is opening balance, I think they cannot deny me the benefit of the credit in SBN. Incidentally, you may also recollect that if a tax comes under 115 BBE by way of an addition made by the assessing officer, then there will be a 10% penalty under 271 AAC. However, you may notice that if it is a search operation, then 271 AAC has no applicability, but 271 AAB will have applicability. Therefore, the rate of tax may be much higher, or 270A may be applicable. The rate of tax may be much higher. So these, friends, are some of the points that I thought I should share with all of you. I think we have a few minutes, or 5 more minutes to go. If there are any queries, I'll be pleased to try and answer them. Otherwise, again, as is usual, I think I should thank the organizers for the opportunity, because that is a learning experience for itself. and all of you for a very patient hearing. If there are any questions, I'll be pleased to answer.
can ask questions to the members. The questions இருந்தா கேட்கலாம். Sir, in the case of opening balance of creditors, say that the credit was received 2-3 years back, whether addition can be made this year under section 68.
Sir, the provisions of section 68 very clearly are applicable only to a credit of the previous year. If the credit was in an earlier previous year, if at all that year's assessment has to be reopened and addition made, it cannot be made in the current year. It cannot be made in the current year.
Interest பொறுத்து sir, interest is current year charge பண்ணிருக்கோம்.
If you have debited interest for the current year, then maybe I can disallow the interest. But before I do that, I first have to come to the conclusion the credit is bogus. So unless the addition is made in respect to the credit, there is no conclusion that the credit is bogus and consequently interest cannot be disallowed.
Sir, there are certain sundry creditors which could not be confirmed by the party. So, due to the paucity of the time, the party has agreed for the addition. So, is it possible for the assessing officer to assess under section 16A and so that 115BB will be invoked?
So, a creditor who has not been offered, sir, when was this credit? What is the nature of credit, sir?
It's purely business transaction, sir. Long pending openings and long pending opening balances, sir.
The opening balances, huh?
Yeah.
Opening balances, na current yearly you cannot add, sir. You can add it only in the, unless it is a 41-1 like situation where, you have claimed it as an expense in the earlier year and now you are writing it back, or the assessing officer finds that it is no longer payable, it can be added. For section 68, he has to add it only in the year of credit, sir. He cannot add it in the current year.
Actually, during the course of scrutiny, he wanted certain confirmations from said creditors, sir. So, for some of the creditors, the assessee was not able to provide it. So, finally, what happened due to the paucity of the time, just the assessee has agreed for the addition. So, now the audit objection has come. Why not it be treated as income under section 16A? Like that, an audit objection has come.
Okay. So, now what the audit party is probably looking at is something like this, sir. See, there is a creditor in my books of account in the last year and in the current year. Right? There is a credit in my books of account in the last year and in the current year.
No, sir, it is in last year. Current year opening balance.
Correct. But this year also the credit will remain. My balance, the credit will remain.
Yeah.
What the audit party is trying to say is you have probably settled it off by cash. And consequently, the creditor is no longer existing in reality, though it is existing in the books.
Actually, what a pity in this case is that the assessee has agreed for this addition only because of there are much amount of carry forward loss. So now because of this audit objection, notice has come from the officer. Why not it be taxed under section 16A so that he cannot claim the carry forward set off of loss.
Okay. So this is the only thing that is clearly defensible, in the sense that unless the department can demonstrate that cash has been paid, they cannot presume that cash has been paid. So they are presuming that cash has been paid. That cannot be. Right, sir? So I think 16A, you can definitely defend yourself, sir.
Sir, I raised the point regarding valuation mainly not only with reference to 69 but also with reference to 69D, where it has been told that not only this gold, bullion or jewelry or whatever valuable articles is found. So suppose I have got some shares of which only partly accounted for and partly not accounted for. So the not accounted for shares, whether it is to be valued at the fair value or at the value at which the original shares have been valued or any other value that is to be adopted.
Sir, if you see section 69B, it says, as funds of which is found to be the owner and the assessing officer finds that the amount of or making such investment or acquiring the bullion, jewelry, or valuable article or thing exceeds the amount recorded in the book of account maintained by the SSE for any source of income, and the SSE offers no explanation, the assessing officer may tax the excess amount as deemed income. So it only talks of what is incurred for acquiring the bullion, jewelry, valuable article or things. So the incurrence is necessary, but then once it is deemed as current income, then the addition will be made in the current year. But if it is found in an earlier year, you can only add what amount is invested in that earlier year. In the context of 69B, sir, in my understanding, if it is shares, for example, you can only add the investment, not the value of the current value of the share.
Suppose I have not accounted the entire shares itself, but when they have come for raid, they found the share certificate in my table. So they want to now add it under 69. I have not accounted for it at all. Then can't they add it under 69B or 69C? Because I have not accounted for my investment. I have not accounted for my investment.
So 69C, I would think cannot be done. 69, yes, they can, but then they can add only the value of investment.
Value of investment, which value? Present value? Market value?
Value of investment, what I invested. Because that's related back to that year only. See, only 69A deems it as the income of the year in which it is found. Sir, only 69A deems it as the income of the year in which it is found. The other provision, 69 and 69B, deem it as the income of the year in which the investment is made.
So similarly, another doubt, suppose if the officer finds some banned notes after demonetization, whether that can be taken as income?
If you deposit in the bank itself, they are taking a
No, I have not deposited in the bank. It is in my locker. But those notes have been banned already.
No, but then he can take it as income, sir. Of course, your logic that it has no value today, so it cannot be taken.
It doesn't have any value at all on date.
Because if he wants to add it, he has to add it under 69A. And 69A is the value of the current year. So you can always say that it has no value and therefore no addition can be made under 69A. That's a possibility.
But I think if the officer can prove that these notes have come to me before the date of demonetization, then he can add it as my income.
Of that year.
Yeah, of that year.
But then, which year will he take? Because if you go outside 69A, sir, he has to go to the year of investment. Hello?
Hello, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir, only 69A permits you to year in which it is found. Other sections require you to go back to the year of investment. Even if he finds that it is prior to demonetization, which will always most probably be the case, which year will he take? எந்த வருஷத்தை reopen பண்ணி பண்ணுவாங்க? சார் இப்ப சர்ச்சே வராங்கன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்க சார், 6 வருஷம் 7 வருஷம் reopen பண்றாங்க சார், அந்த 7 வருஷத்துல which year is he going to add this to?
Like he will add to the immediate year. Then the onus is on the assessee now to prove that it is not of that year or whatever it is. Because the officer will simply add it to the immediate previous year, saying that it is the income which you are now keeping it in cash.
So if
Or
it is
now it has been monetized.
the previous year,
Yeah.
finds it, then there is no value for it, he cannot add it.
That was one doubt, sir. The another doubt was, while when you were in your excellent speech, you mentioned that you can accept the demonetized notes for in consideration of yours, so that you cannot say that it is valueless. You can always exchange it for value because the date is not yet over.
Yes.
Yeah, but does it mean that we are indirectly helping those who are having black money to route the black money through you to the bank?
Sir,
Is it right? How can we accept in our profession?
sir, அதாவது slightly different fashion. What you are talking is logic, sir. What I am talking is law, sir. Logic and law need not survive together. Because see, if you take, in fact, one of my teachers used to tell me there's a difference between English, mathematics, and law. He said English. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He used to say mathematics is A is equal to B, B is equal to C. Okay.
Yes, sir.
If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then B is equal to C. But in English, if I love my wife and my wife loves her sister, sir,
Yes, sir.
it doesn't necessarily mean you can strike off the wife. Okay, the same thing. Sir. What you are saying is very logical, but then the law has to make a provision for it. See, if you look at the old demonetization, acceptance itself was banned, sir. Under the present demonetization of 2016, acceptance was not banned. What is wrong in doing what is otherwise permissible in law?
No, actually,
வாங்கக்கூடாதுன்னு சட்டம் இருந்தா வாங்கக்கூடாது சார். Let us look at it this way, sir. இப்பவும் கூட தான் சேல்ஸ் பண்றாங்க, பிளாக் மணி ரூட் பண்றாங்க. இதுக்கு முன்னாடியே தான் பண்ணிட்டு இருந்தாங்க. Can you say that I am helping somebody to root it? I am
not like that.
furthering my business interest by accepting it, which is not prohibited. It is not prohibited by law. Isn't it, sir?
Yeah, your logic is in your your legal thinking. It is right, sir. But anyway, in practice, how we can accept it or how we can help it is a question. So
Possibly, that's all. But I don't see a prohibition in law, sir.
So similarly, in the previous demonetization cases, there were lots of replies that the notes which were found have been actually drawn from the bank itself and have been kept for so far. It has not been banked or anything like that. What happened to those cases, sir? Has the department actually...
No substantial time gap. And most of these have been subject matters of fact, sir. Subject matters of fact, rather than legal conclusion, depending on circumstances. See, if I'm able to demonstrate that I drew the cash for this purpose, but it didn't fructify, then I have a better case. Okay, sir? Sir?
Hello, sir. Excellent speech.
Sir. Vasishthar Vayal, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thought-provoking. I think we should again read the subject and come through, because I will be sending your message in. So I think I can go through and I can ask my doubts again.
Sure. Anytime, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
உங்களில் ஒருவன் சார் நான்.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Making this session very interactive.
I found some questions in the mail, sir.
Yeah, please, sir. A mail ID தெரியும் இல்லைங்களா sir? I'll just type out my mail ID just for. என் phone numberம் கொடுத்துறேன் sir. All or anybody, anytime. Yes, sir. Fine.
Members, any other questions இருக்காங்க?